So today we're going to talk about messenger games. First, just a couple really brief words about myself. I'm an executive producer at MobilityWare. I've been making games for a really long time. I've led the team that made 38 different games. Two of them are instant games, available on the instant games platform worldwide right now. We have Jigsaw and Blackjack. We have other games in development and soft launch. All the slides are already posted. If you go to my Twitter account there, you can find a link to the slides. Just look at James C. Smith. And throughout the slides, I'm going to have a lot of pictures of instant games in action with like my profile picture in there. So that's an example from one of the messages in one of the games. And just to give you a slightly better view, that's me riding a unicycle down a mountain bike trail. So when I'm not making games, that's how I like to spend my time. But let's talk about instant games. These are games developed in HTML5, which allows them to work on Windows and iOS and Android and Mac and just about anything that can run a web browser. But the reality is most of these games are played on mobile. About 95% are played on mobile, usually inside the Messenger app. They can also be played inside of the Facebook app or on the mobile web. But primarily we're talking about mobile games inside of Messenger. And here's an example on the right of what that often looks like. This is Words with Friends, where I made a move, sent it to my brother made a move, sent it back to me. So you see this kind of transaction history in the chat log. Showing what happened in the game, and then we can also chat in the thread and comment back and forth or whatever. So this is kind of what a lot of people picture when they think of messenger games. This is part of it. It goes way beyond that, so we'll show many other types of interactions. But what's so exciting about this platform is the instant part, that if I invite you to a game of Words with Friends, all you have to do to play is click on the invitation. There's nothing to download or install. You don't have to log in, you don't have to give permission to access Facebook, whatever. You're just into the game playing instantly. So this is great for players. They get in seamlessly. It's easier for developers to recruit players. But for developers, you have to get used to kind of recalibrate some of your metrics. The D1 retention numbers are going to be very different in a game where the player had no investment at all to get into the game. There's zero friction to enter. They don't end up installing an app on their phone. They don't have an icon on their home screen. So the chance of getting them to come back into your game is a lot harder. So players still do, but just when you're looking at those retention benchmark numbers, keep in mind that this is a very different platform. There was no app detail page where people read about your game before they played it. The way they learn more about the game is by playing the game. And then a lot of them, it's not for them and they churn out, and that's okay. So this platform launched back in October of 2016 with 17 games. A lot of them were classic arcade games and other games people know. Most of them were kind of score chase games. We were competing on a leaderboard. Since then, things have evolved a lot. When I took an inventory at the end of 2017, these are the 82 games that were available on the platform that day. So obviously, very different than the 17 that started out a while back. These are much more feature-rich games, more diverse, a lot more of them. But there's actually very few. 82 games is probably how many were launched on the iOS App Store in the last 16 minutes, or maybe less. So this is a very curated platform. Facebook is careful about what games they launch. There's usually about 2 or 3 games a week at most. And so even with that tight curation, not all of these games are great. So today we're going to focus on just the top 30 games. And this is ranked based on MAU. When you play any instant game, on the loading screen, it'll tell you how many players are playing that game. And so this ranking is not something Facebook shows. In Messenger, you'll never see the games listed in this order. Messenger tries to figure out what game you're likely to like based on what country you're in or what games you played before or who your friends are or who knows what algorithm they're using behind the scenes. But I took that list and resorted it by MAU just so we could look at what are the top. So that top row is the top 10 games, and the rest is the top 30. And we'll just talk a little bit about what types of games there are. So out of those top 30, 7 of them are sports games. So sports are games people are familiar with. They make sense to play back and forth in a multiplayer setting. It's a natural fit. There's also 7 classic tabletop games like chess and Battleship and Jigsaw, things like that. And next we have 4 classic arcade games. Many of these were launch titles. Some of them are a little newer. But just games that are super easy to get into, games people are already familiar with. And what's left that I haven't mentioned yet, it wasn't a sports game and not a tabletop game. Many of these are also games that people are already familiar with. Cut the Rope and Adventure Capitalist, 4 Pixel 1 Word. Those were all smash hits on mobile and then taken over to instant. So the kind of key takeaway is the most successful games have been games that have broad appeal, games people are already familiar with. Some of them are IP people know, like Battleship. Others are just kind of common core mechanics like bowling or basketball that people are super familiar with. To play a social game with your friends, in order for your friends to be able to play with you, it needs to be a game that your friend knows and likes. And so if you're building a game that's kind of a niche that has a small loyal following, that's not going to work nearly as well as a game that everyone knows. Because to play with your friends, it's got to be a game that your friends already know and like. So other than the game type, let's talk about different types of social interactions. A lot of the instant games are multiplayer games. So these are 10 multiplayer games on the platform. And of course, again, we're talking within the top 30 performers. There's 10 multiplayer games. And to break them out by type, that top row of 7, these are all asynchronous multiplayer games. So you can take your turn. Doesn't matter if your friend is online or not. They'll get a message. They can take their turn later and play back at you. So this async nature is really great to play with friends because the friends don't have to be online at the same time as you. But it's also important that all of these games allow live play, that if my friend happens to be online when I send them a move and they play back at me, I don't have to exit the game and go back to the messenger thread to see the move. I can just stay in the game experience and play a live back and forth game. The bottom games require live multiplayer, which allows for different kinds of play experiences. And well, we'll get into more details. I just want to talk about some of the best practices if you're making a multiplayer game. Part of the equation is having a way to select friends and invite friends into the game. So the platform provides this kind of default friend picker. It shows every friend you have, whether they play the game or not. You can search for friends by name, but it's kind of an overwhelming list. And it's useful and important, but it's also good for your game to have your own friends list. So this is an example from Words with Friends, where they give me recommended friends. These are friends that already played, probably friends that played recently. And so it's a good way to get your players started right away, interacting with someone who's likely to play back at them. Now, it's still important that you're able to invite other friends who haven't played the game yet. So if you click the Choose Opponent button at the top, that's where it takes you to the generic friend picker. But a lot of games have integrated friend lists. So here's examples from 8-Ball Pool and chess. They show which friends are playing. They show some stats about the friends. They have various ways to interact with those friends. So don't just rely on the generic friend picker the platform provides. Also have a way of surfacing friends in the game in other ways. Now, once I invite a friend to play, they might not be online, or they might not play back at me. They might not be interested. So it's important to have other ways to play with non-friends. So that could either be playing with strangers or playing solo. And in Words with Friends, they've recently added a new instant play feature that lets me have the game match me up with a random opponent, and it kind of warns me that I'll be put into a new chat thread with that new friend. Bowling also lets you pick a random match in addition to having friend matches. Chess has 3 different ways to play with strangers. You can pick if you want to play a blitz game or an attack game or a classic game. And then there's also the play with friends option in the middle there. And Battleship, you can play with friends or play with strangers or play solo where you play against an AI. And last we have Golden Boot. Golden Boot is actually more of a single player game. You're just trying to shoot goals and see how many goals in a row you can shoot without missing to rack up a high score, and then you can kind of compare scores with friends on a leaderboard. That's one way to play. But they've also added a live duel mode where you get matched up with another opponent, and you each have 60 seconds to try to score the most points you can right now. And it's not your best score ever. It's just like in this moment, how well can you do against this opponent? And so they let you play that duel mode either with a friend or a group of friends or with a random stranger. So just relying on people playing with friends is not going to get you there. You need to have options to play with strangers or play solo, and all these great games do that. Once you invite a friend to play with the game, there'll be a message sent to the friend saying, James wants to play with you. So here's 6 examples from games that are doing well, showing how they invite players into the game. So obviously you want to show off, the style of your game, the graphics, the look, impress people like, oh, that looks like a fun game to play. But also show that picture of James on his unicycle or whatever player is playing. Like that really draws the players in to, it's not just a message from a game, it's a message from my friend. And not only does the chat thread say it was from my friend, but the picture I see shows my friend in it. Where appropriate, show the opening move. Like in pool here, I broke the table, and it's showing like the game's already in play, James already broke, it's your turn to shoot. At the bottom of all these messages, there's a call to action button, we call it. So this is where the developer gets to specify what button appears at the bottom of the message, what text is in that button, and what action happens when the player clicks the button. So clicking that button will deep link into the game, and depending on what button they clicked, it could perform different actions in the game. So all the messages I'll show you will all have something at the bottom that I'll call the call to action. So anyway, in this case, the call to action is, accept challenge or play. Once a game's in progress, you're going to want to send a move to your opponents and let them know that it's their turn. So now that we have 2 players involved, show both players, show the avatar image of you and your opponent, show the game state of what move was made. On the bottom right, we have an example from the test where I answered a question, and my friends are going to try to guess how did I answer the question. So we have like a little tease in the message saying, how do you think James answered this question about cosmetic purchases? Kind of draws players in. Last, in multiplayer games, nudges are important. So I was playing a game of Words with Friends against my brother. My brother hadn't played in a long time. And so when I try to go into that game, Words with Friends says, hey, do you want to send a nudge to your brother to get him to make his move? So when I hit that nudge button, it pushes this message into the conversation thread with my brother, lets him know that James is waiting on you. In addition to having nudge messages from a friend, you could also have a bot send a nudge message. We'll talk about bots more later, but this is an example from chess where I was playing with a random stranger. And in that game, I don't have the ability to message the random stranger I'm playing with, but the bot sent a message kind of on my behalf saying, James is waiting on your move. Or in this case, the bot was telling me that my opponent was waiting for James. Words with Friends also uses bots to let the player who's waiting know that, this guy's waiting, do you want to send a nudge message to him? So there the call to action is nudge, which was sent to me from a bot. So just a summary of all the things I said for people who look at the slides later and didn't hear me. But the last one I want to reiterate is that allow real-time play. Even if it's an async multiplayer game, allow your players to play back in real time. So that's a review of the multiplayer games we talked about. Let's clear those from the board and talk about what's left. These are all the instant games without multiplayer. And let's look at how many of them have leaderboards to have social interactions. It's almost all of them. Solitaire and Cookie Mom are the only ones that don't. So we'll talk more about leaderboards in a second, but first I want to talk about some other types of social interaction, but besides just multiplayer and leaderboards. Everwing does an awesome job of having ways to play with essentially a guild. They use a chat group thread as a guild, and when you win something, you can share it with your group. It's an awesome way to make the game more social. We'll look at some examples from Jigsaw and Words with Friends, but first I want to call out Cookie Mama and Solitaire actually have no real way to socially interact with your friends. And sometimes that might be okay. There's actually 2 Solitaire games on the platform. On the left, we have Solitaire from Jam City, and on the right is Solitaire Live. And the MAU numbers are quite different. The classic Solitaire game that has no social component at all has 6.5 million players. And Solitaire Live on the right adds the ability to play live with an opponent. You see the opponent's avatar, you see their moves in real time, you're racing to finish the game. They have a more stylized look, they have magic to give kind of a currency for the players to collect and compete with. And it's just not working for that game. There might be other reasons why, but I mean, my speculation is that the social was forced into this game in a way that doesn't fit. So my takeaway is don't force a game to be social just to make it social. Or if you do, make sure you pick the right kind of social. That Solitaire players don't necessarily want to compete with each other. It's certainly not working very well for Solitaire Live, at least not when compared to the classic Solitaire on the left there. So some other fun social interactions. This is 4 Picks 1 Word. It's a great puzzle game where you see these 4 pictures and can anyone figure out what's in common between these 4? When I played, I was stumped. I couldn't figure it out. So the game has a button to ask a friend for help. And I clicked that button and put it into a group chat thread and just asked a bunch of my coworkers, hey, does anyone know the answer to this? So this message was posted into the group thread that James is stuck here. Can you help him out? And when that happened, Doug clicked on the message and he figured out, oh, it's raw, and he typed that in. So I got a chat message sent back to me that Doug solved the puzzle for me. And then my call to action there is try it myself. I can launch into the game. It takes me right to that puzzle, lets me put in the answer. This is a brilliant way to make the game more social. And note, it's not competitive at all. This is cooperative. You're helping your friends. So most of the games are very competitive, but not all of them. You don't have to be competitive. Another non-competitive example is the Jigsaw game that my team made. On the top is kind of the Jigsaw economy and progression for the single-player portion, but on the bottom is a list of all my friends who play Jigsaw, and I get to see how many puzzles they finish. So it's kind of a leaderboard of sorts. But I also see the puzzle they finished most recently and other information about them, and I can request puzzles from them. So here I'll click on my friend Ian, and I get to browse the gallery of all the puzzles Ian's finished. And I really like the picture of a deer there, so I'll click the picture, and the game gives me an option to send a request to Ian. So this on the right is a message that was sent into the messenger thread conversation between me and Ian, where it says, James is asking for this puzzle, I'd love to have it. And Ian gets a call to action to share this message with James. So when Ian clicks share, posts a message back to me, so we have this conversation back and forth. I sent a request, Ian fulfilled the request, and now my call to action is collect. I can collect this deer that Ian sent to me. So it's a great way, not just the messages back and forth, but also within the game, I can browse my friend's gallery, interact with my friends in the game. It doesn't matter if they're online or offline. It's just a fun way to make a game more social. But ultimately, leaderboards is the way most of these games are social. And when the platform first launched, there was kind of an out-of-the-box leaderboard solution that was provided that on the left there, Everlake is using. But many other games have, since, as the platform evolved, now it's up to the developer to provide their own leaderboards if they want them. And so a few developers have kind of recreated new leaderboards that look kind of like the legacy older leaderboards, so that's what we're seeing here in Block Party and Basketball Forever. But they've added a lot of interesting functionality that's worth noting, that you're not just competing on an all-time high score, you get to see how did the players, you can compete daily or weekly, or instead of looking at global, you can look at just friends only or just a chat group. So there's a lot of examples here of more integrated leaderboards. And 4picks1word is a nice leaderboard that shows up between levels. Cookie Crush has a saga map, which is kind of a leaderboard in its own sense. A venture capitalist prefers to just show you global leaderboards, and we talked about Jigsaw has kind of a unique take on leaderboards. Here's our blackjack game. It's a live tournament system. So there's, as I play the game, there's a mini leaderboard on the left that updates in real time to see how my ranking is relative to my opponents in the tournament. And then at the end of the tournament, I get a complete readout of the whole leaderboard. So one thing that's great with leaderboards is messaging your friends who are offline. If I just passed up my friend and beat him, you might want to send a message to let him know. So these are some examples of leaderboard update messages being posted in threads. So just a summary of the things I've talked about there. Now, besides sending leaderboard updates or turn updates, there's a lot of other ways you can share messages with your friends within the platform. And brag is a really common one, that I just accomplished something amazing, I want to let all my friends know. So here's a lot of great examples of sending brag messages. And a lot of these have call to action buttons where you can click and play the same puzzle that your friend played, or get the same content that your friend just received. It's also good to have just a generic invitation. Here if your players, make it easy for your players to tell their friends about the game, even if they don't have something specific to brag about. Just say, invite a friend to play. You might like this game. So here's some invitation examples. So we've talked a lot about messages between players, but messages can also come from your bot. So the bot is essentially a message from your server, and rather than taking place in a conversation between two friends, it's essentially a conversation between the player and the game developer. And it's really the equivalent of a push notification on mobile. And so there's a lot of creative ways you can do this. This is kind of a welcome message that after you play the game for the first time and quit back to Messenger, a bot will send you a message saying, welcome to the game. This is important for to help players find a way to get back into the game. They might not know how they discovered it. They don't have an icon installed on their home screen. So the next best thing is a conversation with a bot to remind them that the game is there. Besides just welcoming them immediately, a common tactic is if I installed the game yesterday or played for the first time yesterday, then today the game will send me a reminder message that, hey, you played this game yesterday, why don't you come back? And so these simple comeback messages just kind of talk about the virtues of the game and why the game is so great and we miss you and please come play. So those are nice. Even better is when you have a specific reason to come back, that there's this new free gift of the day, new puzzle of the day. So there's a lot of examples of games that have kind of essentially a login bonus or a reward for coming back each day. So send the bot message to remind players about that. A lot of games also send messages. The first time I started playing Words with Friends, a bot sent a message to all my friends letting them know that we were that I was available to play with. And here, if there's something happening right now, like a tournament's about to end, and this is your last chance to get a high score in the tournament, then you might want to come back now. And obviously, if you have new content in your game, you've got a new content pack release, an update, send out a bot message to all your players. Let them know what's new in the game. And last, I want to show a really cool example from Basketball Forever. They have a coach send you a message the first time you play the game. And he asks you some questions, and it kind of becomes a choose-your-own-adventure a little bit. There's a little personality there. But it really is a goal-setting system. The coach gives you some goals, and it gives the player a fun way to interact with the game. And the last example is 4picks1word. if I haven't played the game in a while, yesterday I maybe was stuck on a puzzle. Today the bot will send me a message saying, here's that puzzle you were stuck on yesterday, and I'll give you the first letter. It really helps you along in the game. So rather than recap, do we have some questions?
So with the launch and growth of some other platforms, whether it's been social or mobile or VR, there's been a whole ecosystem that's built up around investment, content development, monetization. There's been sizable exits, $1 billion plus. Do you think instant games is a platform like that where all of this will develop, or is it just a feature within Facebook?
So I think the future is new ways of experiencing games rather than downloading and installing apps. I think some form of instant games is going to be a big part of the future. And so Facebook has one take on that. Like Facebook Messenger is one way of enabling HTML5 games. A lot of other people are doing it. I mean, I can't really predict if it's going to be the biggest thing in the future, but it's worth looking at. It has a lot of potential.
So you primarily focused on Facebook. What do you think about other messenger app platforms like WeChat, KakaoTalk, Line, etc.?
Most of those examples are games that are essentially using native games that you have to download and install an app from the App Store and log in, and they're just using, they can integrate into Message. So iMessage has an interesting solution and Kakao and Line, but they're still relying on native apps. I think what's really interesting about what Facebook is doing is the instant games where there's no app to install or download, you're just seamless in. But WeChat is starting to catch on to that and doing some similar things. So that's what's exciting to me about it, is this cross-platform nature and like the seamless entry into the game. I mean, essentially iMessage isn't getting much take-up. Like, it's not much is happening there. And some of the others were mildly successful, but I think this has a lot more potential.
I've heard these referred to frequently as HTML5 games. Do these instant games only exist in HTML5?
Yes, the games have to be HTML5. You can use other tools that will generate HTML5, but in the end, the game is played inside of a web browser, inside of Messenger.
So how's the monetization like for these games? Is it ad-based, in-app purchase? What's the stages? Where is it heading?
Currently, the monetization comes from ads, so most of the games on this, and ads only recently became available. For the while, the games had no monetization, but now ads are an option. You can have rewarded ads or interstitial ads. And Facebook has announced publicly that there will be in-app purchasing in the future, but it's not ready yet. It's being tested in some test markets or test games. But IAP is in the future.
A quick question about following this line in terms of advertisement revenue. How would you compare the advertisement revenue currently generated in the Messenger versus the same game on mobile?
I can't really comment on that. I mean, partially just because it's too early to tell. We just recently started monetizing these games, and they're kind of comparing apples and oranges in a lot of ways. But it's not there yet. But I think there's potential. It's the short version.
What feature set does the platform currently support beyond basic HTML5? Is it like, were you able to include multimedia in any form, audio, video, or use of devices, cameras, whatever?
So the games are running inside of a sandbox provided by the platform. So even some things that are possible on web games might not be allowed by that sandbox. So essentially, there's no way to access the camera right now. But you can play video and audio, and I mean, there's a lot of robust HTML5 game engines available. And so basically, if you have an HTML5 game, a game designed for HTML5, it'll generally work. But there are some like fringe features of HTML5 that are not supported by the platform. Thank you.